Hello and welcome to AEF TV in association with Engerati. We're now joined by Lucas from NG. And Lucas, firstly, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be at the studio, especially at this early hour as well.
Yes.
So it's a test to the grey cells.
Exactly.
And Lucas, we're talking a little bit about, off air, and we had a lot of mention yesterday about IPPs and the role they play. You know, can you give us your view about the role of IPPs, especially drawing on some of the international experience you guys have?
Sure. For me, what is important is what Africa is standing today. It's a lot of countries have gone through exactly the same phase, but in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And we as NG, formerly known as GDF Suez, for those people who don't know who NG is, we've done this in Thailand, we've done this in the UAE and the Middle East and all countries, we've done it in South America. And what all those countries had in common is that they needed a huge amount of power built very quickly in a transparent, open, competitive way. But what is important to realize is that all those countries, there's not one IPP model. They all chose their own system, their own structure. If you look at Thailand, Thailand chose to have, let's say, 50% of the power generated by the state-owned utility and 50% by IPPs. And they benchmark the IPP price with their own utility to make sure that that's cost competitive. You can also choose, for instance, in Brazil, we have 13,000 megawatt operating, which is mainly hydro. And as you know, one of the biggest risks of a hydro IPP is the hydrology risk. But Brazil created a system that all the hydro and hydrology risk is joined by all the hydro power plants. So you don't, it's a joint insurance more or less for all the hydro across the country. IPPs can be, it's what the government decides you get. You can have very short-term IPPs, like 15 years in Oman. You can have 40 years in Kuwait. We have certain IPP structures where the state takes a share, a minority share, sometimes a majority share with guaranteed returns. Or you have an IPO obligation, like what we have in both Kuwait and Oman. We built a power plant, and within 2 years after COD, we have an obligation to IPO 30 to 40% of that plant to make sure that the public of that country becomes a public service and an ownership in that one. So I think there is all those models. And if you see what's happening in Africa, you say there is this huge demand of power. We all agree on that one and say, okay, why don't more countries learn from what happens in South America, in Chile, in Peru, in Brazil, in Asia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Malaysia, etc., who have all gone exactly through the same phase, made their choices, and have now at least sufficient power supply to supply their people.
So can I ask you an obvious question? Because we had, you know, you've gone very far afield. Let me go closer to home in Africa. Yeah. You've got a successful IPP program in South Africa. At least that's what everybody tells me. Correct. That it's successful. You've got the same model in Kenya as well, again, yep, with success. So, you know, and you've mentioned all sorts of different models, so yep, they're all out there, they've all Correct. Been done. What's stopping the benchmarking? You know, if I look at the technology world, you know, when you build something, you document it, you write it up, and then you can share it. You know, why is that sort of sharing not happening? Is there some sort of innate feeling that people think that they're different when actually they aren't?
I don't know. I think a lot of countries want to maybe reinvent the wheel a little bit themselves. And I think every country will have a unique mix of natural resources, whether it's renewable or thermal resources.
Yeah, there'll be nuances.
There will be nuances, but I think it comes with a commitment from the country on a very high level to say, okay, we will accept that part of our power production is done by IPPs. We accept, and then once you do that, and you've developed a structure like South Africa has done, Kenya, but also Morocco very strongly in Africa, I mean, then you will get what you want. But you get it much quicker. It doesn't cost you the money, you don't have the money from the state. Up front, okay, you pay over 15 or 40 years, or anything in between. And you normally get the most cost competitive, well built, because IPPs have an incentive in a proper structure way to be have extremely high availabilities over 25 years. If you see what we need to do here in this country, we're in Dubai today. If you see what the guarantees we have to give during the summer when it's 40, 50 degrees, we have to be 99% available for 6 months with all our power plants. And else we pay huge penalties. So there is a system to do it. And so you just need to choose, but I think it comes with a decision to say, yes, we will go for IPPs.
And again, there's a lot of talk, more so than ever, about the role renewables play in all of this. And is there anything hugely unique about putting renewables onto the grid? I mean, you know, the price of solar is dropped, the efficiency is constantly improving. You know, we're saying that renewables are somewhat unique because they follow a version of Moore's law, you know. Every 5 years the solar panel is more efficient and so on. You know, but you can't wait, right? You can't, it's like buying a laptop, right? You can't wait to buy it just because a new efficient one is coming around the track.
I agree.
So what's your view on the sort of renewable side?
I think on the renewable side, we're seeing tremendous changes. Indeed, the prices are going down. But in the last 6 months, we have seen, for instance, in solar, large-scale industrial solar, PV, prices under $60 in the UAE, in Dubai. 2 months ago, $50 in California for a 25-year PPA without indexation. And we participated ourselves to a tender for onshore wind in Egypt, where our tariff was $40. So if you look at those figures, $40, $50, $60 today, which probably will be $30, $40 in, let's say, 2-3 years. And you think a lot of the energy today produced is in Africa, but in other places, is done by diesel. And if you have diesel at $250, and you can build this, yes, it's not 24/7, I understand. But at least if you can replace part of the diesel with this kind of
it's an
models,
offsetting mechanism, right?
Offsetting,
so if that's working, you don't have to spend that expensive diesel.
Exactly, and with this kind of prices and this relatively speed to market, because you can build, if you see in India today, we build solar parks of 50 megawatt plus get built in 6 to 8 months. I mean, so if you take today a decision, you take 4 months to do a proper tender process. By the end of 12 months later, you have solar. Yes, you don't have power at night, but at least you have the replacement and you have a lot additional capacity. So for me, that is where really government should be looking very strongly and reviewing the options to do this.
On that side of things, though, I mean, one of the things we've covered a lot on my network is that it actually puts a different type of pressure, a different type of DNA into your distribution and transmission network. You know, do you not think then that also as part and parcel of going down a renewable strategy for a country, you have to get your grid, your distribution and your transmission grid ready for this type of power? You need to strengthen it, because I remember we were having sort of conversations with Eskom down in South Africa who were saying that, okay, the IPP model is absolutely great, but we don't know where these are going to go, and then the grid isn't strong enough to deal with it. I mean, how do we square that off?
There's a few things I would like to say. First of all, you can, more or less in any grid, you can add 5 to 10% without big disturbance. So why not just start with the 5 parks of 10 megawatt or 50 megawatt, and the grid can handle it. Second, again, an IPP model, you can choose. In a lot of countries, it's not an open choice for the IPP where I go, but the government says this is the place of land where you have to build this kind of power plant, and then you might get around it. And the third part is that also for grids, IPP model does exist. You can have it. So I agree it is a problem. The grid is anyway a problem whether you build renewables or large-scale thermal. So that needs to be tackled as well. But if you really want to kickstart the process, you start with some smaller sized renewables, learn the IPP model, and then go through it both for grid enhancement and maybe other kinds of fuels.
So do you then think also at a forum like this that a lot of the conversation is on the generation side, that we need to start building up the conversations around, okay, well, what are the finance and business models and IPP models for grid and transmission as well? Because there's no point having all this generation. I'm talking very high level here, obviously. There's no point having all this generation if you can't evacuate it and get it to the places it needs to go.
Absolutely, and again, it's the model you choose. I mean, in Laos we have a big hydro plant, but for Thailand, producing power for Thailand, and we were obliged to build the grid until the substation. That's part of the deal.
Right.
So they say, look, you can build anywhere, but you have to build the grid until this substation, and then. Okay, and then you have to take the cost into consideration when you build it and when you bid.
So you extend the scope of the project to say, well, you're also responsible for evacuating the power and getting it out of here.
Exactly. So, and if you do that, in the end, what you say, if we want to build as a country somewhere we have a good resource, a hydro, a thermal, or whatever, solar, you say, okay, I want to build 100 here, but you have to build 200 kV over 80 kilometers until this substation. And the lowest bidder gets it. I mean,
it's economics, right?
It's economics, yes.
So as we're coming to the end of our time here in the studio, can I just ask you very quickly, you've been here all of yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you about today, but are there any sort of highlights that you would draw from sort of conversations that you've had? I mean, there seems to be a sense that, I mean, certainly the event has grown, but does that actually reflect the movement on the ground?
Yes, I mean, what you see is more and more people looking at Africa, at opportunities, and I think it's definitely on the map. Maybe 5 years ago, people would say, okay, Africa, 1 or 2 countries, but that's about it. It's too risky, there's not enough opportunities. So I think that's definitely clear, you see that. I think what you keep hearing is indeed, okay, there is enough money, there's enough people interested, there's enough developers looking at it, but we need to have this next step of sufficient projects. And that's why I come back to my view on if the government regulation, transparency and regulation, and the government set up that IPP program, there are so many people here ready to jump on those projects and to help the governments of Africa, of the African countries, to develop projects.
So it keeps coming back to transparency and regulation. So Lucas, on that note, we'll end it there. Thank you again for watching. It's been another interview at AEF in association with Anjarati. Thanks for watching.